I remember vividly, I was in fifth grade, and there was this group of girls that,
Hmm.
and many can probably relate to this story, that I just wanted to be a part of. And they were known as the ones that got the attention from the other girls, and they always looked great, and the guys loved them. And so I just wanted to be a part of that group. And I remember during lunchtime specifically, that was such an anxiety provoking moment for me every day because I wanted to sit at their table, and I would go every day to see if I could sit down at their table. And sometimes they'd let me, and sometimes they wouldn't. And I would walk away feeling embarrassed, feeling, just nervous that somebody maybe picked up on that and saw that, wondering what was wrong with me. Was I not good enough?
Hello and welcome to the 8th episode of How Are You Really podcast. Today's title is Finding Your Tribe, The Power of Belonging. I am your host, Dr. Faryal Mallick. I'm a child, adolescent, and adult psychiatrist, and I am very pleased to welcome our guest speaker for today, Miss Natalie Rosado. Natalie is a dynamic mental health leader whose work embodies the perfect blend of expertise and authenticity. With a dual master's degree in sociology and mental health counseling, Natalie founded Tampa Counseling Place LLC, an integrative group practice that's transforming holistic healthcare in her community. Her commitment to equity led her to recently establish the Creating Space Collaborative, a nonprofit dedicated to combating workplace inequity. Recognized as an Entreprenista 100 Award recipient, Tampa Bay Women to Watch 2024, and an ALPFA Latina to Watch, Natalie's professional excellence is matched only by her passion for helping women embrace their divine purpose. She brings a unique perspective that weaves together mental health expertise, sociological understanding, and theological insights to empower others to live authentically. All right, welcome, Natalie.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much for that introduction. I'm so happy to be here and really looking forward to talking about our topic today.
Yeah, me too. All right. So this is a topic that actually was coming up for myself personally as well recently. So when we talked about, let's talk about belonging, I was so excited. This is great. So first of all, how do you define belonging?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I want to say I'm so excited that it's a topic that resonates with you too. I will say this, the one thing that really got me really looking forward to this episode is that I don't think that there is a more universal topic or theme that we can be talking about, because belonging is something that touches each and every one of our lives, no matter our experiences, our background, the trauma we've endured, the family we come from, our educational background. Belonging is a basic human need that we all have. And so the way that I define it is an individual's perception of what it's like to be experiencing life with those around them. And through that experience or that perception, they're able to gain a sense of safety, security, support, guidance, and feedback and love. And so I wanted to highlight that specific phrase, though, individual perception, because I think that'll be coming up maybe a little bit more as we continue to go on.
Okay, so individual perception. So perception, like how I am individually viewing the world, might not be how you're viewing it. So this is my perception that I'm not belonging, and not so much the group around me or the community around me. They might not even think that. And it's like my own perspective or view of it.
Absolutely.
So that's,
Yes.
that is such an important part of it though, right?
It is. And I think what it does is, because there's two parts to that. There's our individual perception or sense of belonging, which comes from more internal factors, which I can talk about in a little bit if you'd like. But and then there's the community aspect of that. So then there's the actual external community or subgroups that we're talking about, that somebody would like to feel like they belong to that. So there's the individual component, and then there's the societal or group component. And so I love breaking it up that way because it doesn't put the onus 100% on either one. There are some times where people feel like they just don't belong in a certain community or a certain subgroup or a certain neighborhood or a sphere. And part of that might be the way that they're perceiving their experience. And then part of that then may also be the way that the community is welcoming them or not welcoming them for that.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I have some questions for you about the community too. When did you kind of realize the importance of belonging? Because even though it's such a universal need, right, and a basic need for human beings, a lot of people are not aware of the fact that it's so important, and maybe what they're feeling is the lack of belonging.
Yeah, absolutely. I wish I can say that I think subconsciously I recognized it very, very early on. And
Hmm.
in preparing for this episode, I was trying to think back to some of my early on experiences when it comes to belonging, and I'll share that with you in a second. But consciously, I don't think I was aware of the significance of belonging for us as human beings until probably grad school. So I would say maybe a little over a decade ago, a
Hmm.
decade and a half ago. And it
Hmm.
was when we were going over the Maslow hierarchy of needs, which a
Hmm.
lot of people might be familiar with, might or might not be familiar with it, but I'll just kind of briefly explain it. But there's this idea that and it's shaped in the form of a triangle. But there's this idea that we have certain needs as human beings, and unless the initial basic needs are met, it's going to be very difficult, very challenging for us as human beings to get those additional levels of needs
Hmm.
met. So somewhere smack dab in the middle of the Maslow hierarchy of needs is what Maslow referred to as a sense of belonging. And I
Hmm.
remember reading that in grad school actually, and looking at that and saying, wow, like now a lot of things make sense where and I'll share that one experience. So early on, I say that my life was kind of sprinkled with forms of rejection and abandonment. Again, I didn't really know what those terms were. I didn't know what they meant. I didn't know that's what I was experiencing, but I knew that
Hmm.
something was off. I knew that what I was facing in that moment just didn't feel great to me. And I don't think
Hmm.
I knew why until I began to really educate myself on some of these things. But I'll share this experience. So I remember vividly, I was in fifth grade, and there was this group of girls that,
Hmm.
and many can probably relate to this story, that I just wanted to be a part of. And they were known as the ones that got the attention from the other girls, and they always looked great, and the guys loved them. And so I just wanted to be a part of that group. And I remember during lunchtime specifically, that was such an anxiety provoking moment for me every day because I wanted to sit at their table, and I would go every day to see if I could sit down at their table. And sometimes they'd let me, and sometimes they wouldn't. And I would walk away feeling embarrassed, feeling, just nervous that somebody maybe picked up on that and saw that, wondering what was wrong with me. Was I not good enough? And so, years later, fast forward, I laugh about it now because I'm like, oh, I would have never gone back to that table. I should have just kept walking and created my own table. But that shows you that I knew subconsciously that there was a need of mine that for some reason wasn't being met. And I found myself over the next few years trying to figure out a way to meet that need, sometimes in a healthy way, sometimes in a not so healthy way. But it wasn't until I was an adult that I realized, that's what it was. I didn't have a sense of belonging back then.
Yeah, yeah. So, okay, I want to go back to the hierarchy of needs real quick. So, the thing that went through my mind was so, like, the bottom one is like what food and water, right?
Uh-huh.
Basic needs like shelter, food, water, right? If you have the sense of belonging and you feel like you're a part of a community, right? And things like famine or war hit, how does, in that case, now you don't have food, water, shelter, right?
Mhm.
How does belonging help you? What is the role of belonging there?
Yeah,
Does it come down in the hierarchy
I
then?
love that. That's such a great question. So there are two thoughts that come to mind. So I think the idea behind that is that for someone who does not yet experience a sense of belonging, it's kind of difficult to focus on meeting that need if
Hmm.
the other needs below that, I believe it's physiological needs, which is what you were just referring to, and I believe the second level is safety, if I'm not mistaken. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the idea is if belonging is not met, it's going to be very challenging and difficult to put all of your energy, all of your effort, all of your attention and time and resources to trying to figure out a way to belong when you don't have your other two needs met. So I think that's kind of where it kind of goes into. But it's funny you mentioned this idea of famine and, just kind of going through those kinds of external circumstantial situations. This idea of belonging actually goes back all the way to the very beginning. Really, we're wired this way, and they say because back then, in order to really survive, had to live in a community or a village type environment where I was able to provide you what it was that I specialized in, and then we can exchange, and you could offer me and my family what you specialize in, and there was this bartering that was going on. And so in order to survive, you had to really kind of live in community. There was this gathering that happened within the home, and that's the way that people survived back then. So I think what to your point is that sometimes there might be a sense of belonging that was already there, but then that group or that family or that individual even begins to kind of experience some like circumstantial situations that then maybe threaten the initial two, so the physiological needs and the safety. But if that sense of belonging is already there, I think that's what helps them kind of get through those other needs that are present. Versus, I think it's hard to build belonging if you don't quite yet have the other two needs met. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense.
Yeah, it definitely does. Thank you for like clarifying that. I know it threw like a little difficult question,
Yeah,
but
that's
I
great.
feel like if you have it, it's like great. It can be protective, right, from other
Yes.
things. So I think you already kind of, went into why a sense of belonging would be essential for our well-being. But do you have anything to add to that?
I think that, and hopefully we can kind of get into a little bit more into like how to kind of cultivate a sense of belonging, because I think we would maybe touch upon that a little bit. But really, the reality is that although we might have seasons in our lives where we're pulling away, we might be a little bit isolated, and maybe we're retracting a bit as a protective factor, or we feel hidden from loved ones or, from the outside world for whatever reason. I think those kinds of situations serve a purpose sometimes, and there's a reason for that temporarily. But in the long run, research shows that we are more productive, we have better mental health, our overall physical health and well-being is increased and benefits from us being in a community or multiple communities and groups, because we really derive a lot from being part of a community, which then in turn allows us to feel like we belong somewhere.
Yeah, okay. So I think like one of the feelings that people do realize are feelings of loneliness, that they feel lonely or feel excluded or that they're not fitting in or that they're different, right? So how can people deal with that? And how does that relate to a sense of belonging?
Yeah, I'm so glad that we're talking about loneliness, because research shows actually that somebody that struggles with loneliness, it actually can affect their physical health, mental health, and even longevity of life more so than we actually might even believe. So this feeling of loneliness can really impact someone from the inside out a lot more than we might recognize. So when someone is struggling with this sense of loneliness, I think it's really important for us to go back to one of the basic things that we were talking about, which is a sense of belonging and then the actual communities that exist. And so when somebody feels that, if someone is feeling that today and they're listening to this episode, I think it's important to ask yourself two questions. One is, what parts of my perceptions of myself, of others, and of the larger society might be contributing to this feeling of loneliness? And I can break that down in a second. And then the second question is, realistically speaking, so factually speaking, what are some things that have actually been told to me, that I've experienced outwardly, that leads me to think that I'm not wanted or welcomed in this specific community? So I think it's important to look at it from both aspects. So internally outward, and then outward into internal experiences. So there could be a lot of factors that contribute to someone experiencing feelings of loneliness. When we go into the sense of belonging, so as we mentioned, it's an individual's perception. So there could be a few, what I like to refer refer to as barriers that can get in the way of someone feeling like they can freely connect with another person or a group of people. Now, there's so many to consider, and honestly, I think the number is infinite when we think about our individual journeys and all of those little barriers that really can grow like weeds in our garden. But I think a few that are worth mentioning include fear of vulnerability, I think is one of them. And I think the other one too is this, I guess, mistrust or misperception of what it's like to connect with another human being. And that comes from past experiences, past trauma, and then even sometimes our childhood experiences. Specifically, I'm referring to attachment with our caregivers. So I think when someone is experiencing that, I think it's important to ask, what are some things that I've experienced up until this point that lead me to be a little bit hesitant maybe to connect or to open up as an individual, or maybe to perceive other people's responses and behaviors as rejection and abandonment and being stiff-armed. And then the next question is, what do I even think about vulnerability? How do I feel about vulnerability? And I know that can be a very scary word for many people. And honestly, here's the reason why. I don't know if a lot of people realize this, but the Latin root of the word vulnerability actually is wound.
Okay.
So it makes a lot of sense why naturally when we are in a situation that might be pushing us or encouraging us to be vulnerable, why that is so scary. The definition is we are opening ourselves up to the possibility of harm. Like, who really wants to do that in their right mind, right? It's not something that we innately or naturally want to do. In fact, as we kind of grow into adulthood, we experience so many things that cause us to want to do the opposite, which is to pull away, to protect ourselves, to shield ourselves, to mask ourselves. And so, so this idea of opening ourselves up to potential harm or wound, it's like nobody really wants to do that. But here's the thing. So where there's high risk, there's high reward. And that's something that I always say. If someone is willing to put themselves in a situation where they're going to be more vulnerable, yes, that opens one up to a higher level of risk. But when you think about connection, so the definition of connection is a link between two things. So if you're going to be able to link yourself with someone else or other people in a community, there actually has to be an openness. So there has to be an opening that allows you to link with someone else's opening, right? And that's where the high reward comes from. So if somebody's willing to take that high risk, then they are opening themselves up to that high reward of experiencing true, genuine connection. And so I think those are a few things to think about when someone is experiencing loneliness. It's to kind of do a bit of self-reflection. I think it's important to think about the actual community that they're wanting to be a part of, that they're feeling like they're maybe on the outskirts of. And so I think some important questions to ask are, what are some things that have been said to me or done to me that lead me to feel that way? Do my values and morals and beliefs actually align with this community? Do my interests, passions, hobbies actually align with this community? And so I think asking all of those questions about oneself and others is really important for someone that's experiencing what we're referring to as a sense of loneliness.
Yeah. And so if there isn't in your immediate vicinity people that do align with your values, and this for personally myself, I'm just like, okay, I'm just going to stay home or not be a part of this. This is just not me and I don't fit in, right? In that case, how can people find their community, their tribe, their group of friends? How can they do that? Right, if you have very specific values and you're maybe not exactly aligned with majority of the community, right? And then that's the hurdle or, difficult. You use a word that I really liked. I don't know if it was hurdle or not, but yeah.
Oh, barrier.
There we go. So yeah, the barrier. What advice do you have in that case?
Yeah, I love these practical questions because a lot of times I know myself, I'll listen to some of these podcasts or, just YouTube videos and it's like, I get it, but what can I do? What can I do about that? So I think that's the reason why I wanted to highlight that there's a level of responsibility on the community, but then there's a level of responsibility that we carry as individuals. Because I wanted to stress that we have agency too as individuals, that we have the power and the ability to decide that a community may not necessarily be right for us and we're needing to look for another community and not the other way around. I think so many times people who are struggling with loneliness, and that was me in fifth grade, I was like, they don't want me at their table, not realizing that I had the opportunity just to decide, you know what, I would never treat someone like that the way that they're treating me. And so therefore our values are just not lining up. And so I don't belong at that table. And so I think it's important I think it starts with self-reflection. And I know that's a phrase that gets thrown around quite often nowadays on social media and a lot of blog posts and articles and stuff. But I think there's something to that. It's very difficult to move in a direction if you don't really know where you're starting from and what your ultimate goal is. So I think it's important to ask yourself, what are my values? What are my beliefs? What are my stances on things? What do I feel really passionate about? What are my interests? What are my struggles and challenges? You mentioned entrepreneuristas earlier in my intro, and that's the reason why I joined that community. There are a lot of challenges and struggles that come along with being an entrepreneur, let alone a female entrepreneur. So I wanted to be around other people that understood my challenges and my struggles. And so once you have an idea, a good solid sense of your identity and what you're looking for, then you begin to kind of scout out and look for people that align with those things, right? And so then you might say, yeah, that community that I thought I wanted to be a part of, that I felt kind of on the outskirts of, now I know why we really don't align in the areas that are really important for me. So to answer your question, I honestly think that I know technology nowadays gets a really bad rap, and I can understand why in some senses, especially the irony is we're talking about community and belonging, and sometimes people feel like technology and social media kind of gets in the way of that. But I think it's how you decide to use it on an individual basis. I think that one of the blessings, one of the beautiful things that has come out of social media and technology is that it has eliminated the barriers, again, of like distance and like geographical location and even time. I actually am a part of a Bible women's group, and it's an international one. So my group leader, she started out in India and then she ended up moving over to Miami, and now she's in North Carolina. But we had women all over the world that were meeting at different times, but we were able to create that one specific meeting each week through a Zoom link, right? So I think that actually opens up the endless possibilities and opportunities, because you're no longer just looking in your backyard for people that you just hope and pray align with your values and beliefs, but instead you're able to really kind of look out and go beyond just like the four walls of your community, figuratively speaking, and find other people that are living in so many other different areas, geographical locations, time zones that really would align with what you're looking for. And so I think it depends on how we're wanting to capitalize on this.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. That was going to be my next question. So, this podcast is being sponsored by FMP Mental Health Spa and Family Psychiatry. If you need help, please reach out to us via our website or email or call us. We are available in Tampa, Florida in person, as well as via telepsychiatry in the states of Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Virginia, and now Pennsylvania as well. So since you've already told the benefits of like social media and the role it plays in belonging, what are things to look out for when you're using, technology to find your tribe or find your people? I feel like a lot of the times people that are vulnerable and are looking for belonging get manipulated into joining certain groups that are actually unhealthy just because they're wanting to be part of something so badly. So what are warning signs to look out for that, and how do you avoid getting wrapped up into that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I once heard somebody say a while ago, and I wish I could remember who and where it was to give them credit, but they said if you don't identify what your identity is, someone else is going to. And so I think it boils down to again, find who am I, what do I believe, who do I want to surround myself with, what am I looking for in this specific season, what are my needs, and then also too, because it's not so much what we're needing, but what kind of places am I looking for where I could also kind of pour in and provide my expertise or my personal experiences and help other people, women, business owners who are experiencing something very similar. So, but it's hard to know what you're looking for if you haven't yet identified what that should be, right? So I think getting a visual of like, what would it feel like for me to find, I know we're calling it my tribe, but what would it feel like for me to find my tribe and to have some of those non-negotiables, some of those special qualities that you're looking for. And then once you have those down pat, then you can really go look and see, and that's gonna decrease the chances of someone potentially maybe pulling you into a community or an environment that you're not going to feel comfortable with, because you're going to know very, very quickly, oh man, the things that they're saying or the things that they're presenting me or how I felt in that initial meeting just didn't settle right with me. And it's because you know what you're looking for, and you're very confident in who you are, what you're needing, and then also what you can provide. So I think it always goes back to that self-reflection. I think it's figuring out, what is it that I'm needing, what is it that I can offer, and then what communities best match that for me.
Yeah, I know. I like that we chose the word tribe, because it can be such a positive thing, and yet like it has become more, gets like a lot of negative attention. But as I'm thinking about values and stuff, one of the documentaries on Netflix comes to mind. I think it's on Netflix. The one where these sisters were dancers and they got pulled into this dance club. One of them is still kind of part of this cult, or like just completely brainwashed. Now, these are young girls, right? So for instance, you were in 5th grade, right? What, 10, 11, right? So how, like, and you know, I'm sure that they were attracted to this particular group, tribe, whatever we want to call it, because their value of dancing aligned with it, right? And so, and at that age, I'm sure that it's hard to see your gut feeling, or just that you're so badly wanting to fit. Now you fit in that one value, and then the rest just kind of, okay, I'll accept all of this. So how can young people and adults, because adults get easily pulled into this stuff, avoid that?
Yes, absolutely. I do recall that. I've seen it. Either 7 might be in the title or something like that. I know there's like a house that they live in or something. So yeah, I do recall that. So here's kind of the thought that comes to mind. I don't know if, I know I just said it in passing very briefly in the beginning, but after my experience in 5th grade, I actually found unhealthy ways and healthy ways to kind of meet that need. And, you know, looking back, I was young, but I think that had I really had the opportunity or the chance to kind of unpack some of that hurt and pain and experience that I had gone through, I think I probably would have leaned less on the unhealthy, very quick, instant gratification ways of meeting this need of belonging. Now, I don't hold that against me or anyone else that was in my life at that time, because you kind of live and you learn. Plus, mental health and all of that wasn't really much of a topic back then as much as it is now. But I think that's why it's important to have a good understanding, a deep understanding of who we are, our points of sensitivity, some of the wounds that might be there that kind of need to be cleaned out a little bit, and then understanding our needs and how some of those needs are normal, natural, universal needs, and then figuring out how to be able to meet those in a healthy way. So I think there's healing that needs to transpire. So I don't know I obviously don't know these 2 sisters that we're talking about on a personal level, and so I can't really speak to that, but I think one is more inclined sometimes to open oneself up to the unhealthy coping skills or unhealthy relationships or unhealthy communities if they haven't yet gone through that process of healing or even identifying what are my areas and my points of sensitivity. And so we find ourselves in many different ways trying to meet our needs very quickly, but they're very short-lived, short-term solutions to our problems and our needs. And so that would be my answer to that is I think it's important as we're opening ourselves up, being vulnerable to, the people around us and wanting to make healthy connections, that we recognize that there is a possibility of getting hurt or getting disappointed or getting let down. And I think that's why it's so important to make sure that we're not piling those things on top of each other, but that as they occur, we figure out a way, however we want to, whether it's through a spiritual community, a religious community, or therapy, or any other medical provider, loved ones, that we figure out a way to get those specific things healed before we continue to kind of pile on some of that hurt and disappointment that naturally happens in this world.
Yeah. Okay, so I have a question that if you do not want to answer, that's totally fine. But
No
what
problem.
were some of the unhealthy ways that you were trying to find belonging or you did have that
Yeah.
instant gratification?
Yeah, no, I don't mind at all. I think I would love to share because I think that's how we learn too. We learn from
Mm-hmm.
each other. And you're also asking me to be vulnerable, which I can't talk about it without doing it. So it's funny. I actually just recently moved and I was looking through, I have like just one box of things from my childhood. And I was looking through this. It was actually a signature book. I don't even know if it's a thing anymore, but I guess back in the day, you would get teachers to sign and they put their little, like, their well wishes for you and stuff as you like end one school year and begin another. And I was looking through it and I saw that my fifth grade teacher, ironically enough, wrote, "It was so great having you, you worry wart." And I remember it reminded me, it brought me back to how even that early on, definitely into middle school and 100% into high school and graduate school and undergraduate school, that I found myself kind of really leaning into academia. And I felt like that was my way of getting people to validate me, to reaffirm me, to applaud me. It was my way of ensuring that my parents were happy with me. If I couldn't be known as the popular one or the cool one, then I'll just be known as the smart one. Why not, right? And
Yep.
that worked for a while until it didn't. And I was forced at a moment in my life to look in the mirror and realize I have been depending on external validation to really help me feel like I belong somewhere. The problem with that, so with external validation, is that when the people applaud, it feels great. When the people don't, it doesn't. And I was leaving my happiness and joy in the hands of those around me. And so to answer your question, I would say that's probably the biggest one that comes to mind is that I thought, you know what? That's my in. That's my way of being known for something. And you know, it worked out in the end in some ways, but in other ways, it did leave me having to pick up some of those broken pieces when I didn't get the external validation that I was seeking for as an adult. So yeah, so that was my journey.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. It's, brings me back to the online community thing, right? So there was a time period in my life, I'm going to say a little over a year, where I was feeling lonely.
Mm-hmm.
And just like not feeling like I could find my people, and I was away from family and just trying to figure out where I fit, I guess, in the world, literally. And I found myself like an online photography community.
Yeah.
It was great, very supportive. I appreciated that so much, and I learned so much about photography at that time. So it was great, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it was a great being in that community. But I did eventually get burnt out with all my friends being inside my phone, right? All my support people being inside my phone. And I wanted in-person connection, and I wanted my tribe to be in person. So what do you think, talking about technology, yes, you can find your people online and it makes the world so much smaller based on our values and how we, think, and we can find people that align with that. But with that being said, what is the significance of that in-person community, that in-person interaction, and having the presence of people around you?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing too that experience. I think a lot of people in their adulthood can probably like attest to something very similar. And I think the problem occurs when we're all kind of in from like grade school, secondary school, like we're all in the same kind of pattern and routine, right? And then we hit adulthood and people just kind of scatter. Some start families and some go to grad school and others move and relocate. And then I think that because we've been so trained that like those in our classrooms or in our neighborhood are just our support, then we no longer have the classroom or we have a different community and it's like we don't really know what to do with ourselves. And so I'm really grateful that you shared that.
Hello, everyone. I just wanted to stop by and ask you, how are you really doing? Also, how are we doing? Are you guys enjoying this topic? Please leave us comments about it. And also, if you have any pressing questions, please go ahead and leave those in the comments too. We will find an expert to come and speak about it. Finally, please subscribe to the channel, like our videos, share it with your friends, and follow us on Instagram.
There is something to be said for in-person contact. So recently I've become an aunt of 3 nephews. And so my brother and my sister-in-law, they just had their first child, a son, JT. And I was reminded of this again recently because of that experience. But one of the first things that a nurse or a doctor or a midwife will do is they'll take the baby and they'll place the baby on the mother or the father or the adoptive parents or caretakers, right? Because skin to skin contact is so important. And that is the initial way, very, very beginning, that is our way of connecting with other human beings. For us to receive a sense of comfort and care and nurture and to get those kinds of needs met. Of course, then as we begin to kind of grow and get older and we incorporate language and nonverbal cues and we get an understanding of our emotional needs, that kind of looks a little bit differently. But I think we forget that our first way of connecting to this real world was skin to skin contact. And so I say all of that to say that, yeah, there is something to be said for in-person meetings or an in-person tribe or just hanging out with people that you just feel very comfortable with. Now, I will also add this little piece though. I don't know if you're an introvert. I'm an introvert. I don't know if you are or you identify as an extrovert or somewhere in between. But I think also that it depends on a number of other factors too. Someone's temperament and personality and preferences, and then also seasons of life. Some people, for example, someone listening might find themselves feeling very lonely in their home, even though they're married, they have 3 kids, they have 2 animals, but still there is that sense of loneliness. And so they feel like I just need to connect with someone outside of my home. So I think there are a number of factors that play into this. When you said, I wanted to hang out, I think I got a little like, oh gosh, inside, because I'm like the opposite. It's like, I like my little social interaction and then I kind of pull back and kind of love my quiet time. But yeah, I think we forget that was our initial way of connecting with the world. And so there are different ways to do that. I think, again, thinking about what are your specific needs in this moment? What are some of your struggles? There's something really great about focusing on the similarities. So not so much the differences, but what are something that I'm experiencing or going through or needing that you're experiencing, going through or needing or have already maybe. And you're focusing on those things that overlap. And so you're looking for communities that provide that overlap for you. And that could happen in different spaces. I don't know. I'd love to hear how you were able to find your in-person tribe. But, I think for some, they have a passion for giving back. And so maybe volunteer opportunities is great. Other people have a love for politics. So maybe joining a local political group within your community. For me, I tend to find that within my church. It's a church I go to in person, and so there are women that I just connect with there. So I think it just kind of depends on your struggles, your needs, and then also some of your interests, passions, and hobbies as well. And just looking for places that you think people with those similar things are going to be. So just curious, did you ever find yours?
So yeah, that's so interesting. So I identify as an extroverted introvert. So
Ah,
I'm very extroverted. If I know somebody and I feel comfortable, or like in a group of people that I know, and then I need to, of course, charge my batteries. But if I'm in a group of people that I don't know or I'm meeting for the first time, I will shut down and not talk. And so I literally very lucky and blessed and thankful to this neighbor who literally just forced his friendship on me.
ah.
And there were a bunch of guys, and I was just like, well, why do you want to be friends with me? But literally that's what happened. And then, they were Indian, and their wives started moving to the US one by one, and I really became good friends with their wives as well. And it just I like this beautiful community of friends formed, and we would pretty much do everything together. And so that was really
Uh-huh.
beautiful. Now, of course, that was in a different city, and now I'm here, and people did disperse from there too. But some of the people from that group of friends I'm still very close with, and we still visit each other. And so they're still my people, just, long
Yeah.
distance now.
That's great. That's great to hear. And I
Yeah.
think you bring up a good point. Your community may not come in the form or the way or the look that you're expecting them to, right? So here you are, probably, I'm assuming here, but maybe looking for women in a similar season or maybe similar profession or something. And then here you have this male neighbor that, just wanted to make this connection with you and you were open to it, right? And again, I think that's where like vulnerability comes into play. It's literally being open to the possibility, and then you just see what came from that. So yeah, thank you for sharing.
No, thank you for asking. It was a lot of him convincing, hey, come over, we're hanging out. And then I'm like, no, I don't want to, because it's a group of people that I don't know.
Yes.
And so then him knocking, being like, "Here's some biryani. We made some
Ah,
rice. Here's some food." Just just the kindest person. I'm so grateful for that person to be so persistent with me to
yes.
get me out of my shell. And just like that person and I weren't the closest in the group either. So just an
Uh-huh.
angel. And
Wow.
it's beautiful to note how somebody mediated for me finding my community and me figuring out who I was as I went along through that group of friends, and felt that, oh, I really do belong with this group of
Oh,
people,
that's
right?
beautiful. That's a beautiful
Yeah.
story.
Thank you for watching. If you have enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the podcast and share it with friends. Please connect with us on our social media platforms and tune in next week for the second part of this episode on finding your tribe.